Well, I thought we'd do something a little different on the channel today. We are going to rank the best and worst English Bible translations on this tier list here. We're going to get straight into it. Before I do, make sure to grab my free list of 400 plus Christian books. If you're a reader and you just want quality books curated in one list, grab that below. It's all split into different categories, whether it's eschatology, the Puritans, systematic theology, whatever. We are going to start with these ones down the bottom here. I'm just going to drag them up. Firstly, we've got the Message. Now, we've got our different categories. We've got the definitive versions. A is ones that are worth reading. B is meh, kind of average translations. C is crap. And D is burn it, basically heresy or really bad translations. Not familiar with it. There might be a few there. All right, let's go to the Message. We're going to put that straight in category D here, burn it. I actually used to have a copy of the Message and my dog ate it. So that shows enough. We can call it a book. It's a book. It's not really a translation of the Bible. It's not really the Bible. And it's a transliteration. And the problem with transliterations is they're trying to be a Bible translation and a commentary, in my opinion, in the same one. And I think when you try to do that, you do both jobs terribly. So you'd rather have a good, faithful Bible translation and then just get a good commentary. Much better. Problem solved. All right. Message all transliterations, honestly, just burn it. Amplified Bible. This one's not a transliteration as far as I'm aware from what I've read of it. It's more just it expands on the language of the original languages a bit more. It's still, in my opinion, not the greatest translation because it does have, I think it takes a bit too much liberty. I'm not going to put it in burn it. I'm going to put it in crap though because there's just way better translations out. Yeah. Okay, NET, New English Translation. It's kind of a good... I think the New English Translation, if I remember correctly, was kind of trying to be this, wow, we came up with a brand new translation and it's from scratch and it's close to the original. As far as I've read it, it's not used that often, to be honest. But it's just kind of like, okay, cool. There's much better translations out there, though. So we're going to put that in meh. And the same thing with the Good News Bible. I mean, I think this one favors a little bit of a Lutheran perspective on things. So you're going to see that come through in its translation. Again, meh. It's a bit older. Not that that's bad. Old translations can sometimes be better than newer ones. But there's just much better translations out there. I'm not a Lutheran, so I'm going to put that in meh. All right, New English Bible. I believe it's the New English Bible. I could be wrong. It's aiming to be a little bit more readable. It's kind of like the CSB, I think, but it's, again, I just think there's better ones. I just think there's better ones out there. So yeah, I think we'll put that in meh. There's so many translations of the Bible. The reality is that you have to be picky. And these aren't necessarily terrible translations. They're just not that great. Tyndale Bible. Okay, we're going to put this one in A, worth reading. And it's not worth reading necessarily because it's like the most accurate or the most fantastic translation. In fact, there's a lot of confusing parts about the Tyndale Bible. But this is the Bible translation of William Tyndale, who died to write this Bible translation, which is significant historically. And so while it's not something you're probably going to read day to day, it's not probably something you're going to use for study, I think it's worth checking out bits and pieces of it, just for the historical value it has. And it's really interesting to read it and be like, hey, this is what a guy, gave his life to in a time where it was very difficult. So yeah. That's the Tyndale Bible. Okay, God's Word translation. I don't know tons about this one, but I do know enough that it's kind of trying to be this very modern, readable translation. Do I put it in not familiar with it because I can't give it a fair judgment? I'm just going to put it in meh. From what I've seen of it, it's just sort of like... I think it was developed for missionaries, if I'm not mistaken, who for English... People who wanted to read English who didn't necessarily speak English as a first language. I believe. Someone correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, though. So, if you're an English speaker predominantly, I think it's probably more like C, crap, because it's probably very basic and stuff like that. But if you're, English is not your first language, maybe it's at least worth considering. But meh. CEV, again, there's just so many middle tier Bible translations in my opinion. They're not bad, they're just not the best. And and you have to be really picky. The CEV, in my opinion, the same as like the NEB. It's just kind of like, yep, you know, no, it's the MEV, I'm pretty sure that's more based on the King James, for trying to modernize it. But the CEV is just kind of one of those ones, again, it's like, I think this is a more dynamic equivalence translation as well, so that's where it's not word for word, it's thought for thought. And yeah, I think, in my opinion, dynamic translations are less helpful than literal translations, and I might get some flack for that. But in all honesty, it's like, the thing with dynamic translations, generally speaking, is it's focusing on accessibility over faithfulness to the text. In most cases, in the majority of cases. And thought for thought, while it sounds nice, you know, we're trying to communicate the intention of what the author had, the reality is that the literal translations capture some of the intention more richly, because we're looking at words that have changed in meaning over centuries. So I think dynamic translations in general kind of go down the list in my opinion. Okay, the readable Bible. Pretty sure this is, again, kind of like the Amplified Bible. It's, from what I've seen of it, it's just, it might be more meh than, yeah, I just think it's not that great, in my opinion, readable Bible. And meh, it's kind of trying to be the New King James Version, but less good, in my opinion. So, okay, Christian Standard Bible. All right, we're going to go put this in A. It's not a go-to translation for me, but it is worth reading. I actually think if you're looking for a modern version that I think translates the text in a still more literal way than other, but not as literal as, say, the ESV. It's sort of literal, if I can use that term, than some of the other ones, but it's still very readable. I think that's what you want, right? So CSB can go in A. I've got a friend at church who uses this one, and he loves it. I think the CSB actually came out when the Southern Baptist Convention rejected the NIV as a sound translation, so we'll get to that in a second. Living Bible will go next. All right. Yeah, like, I think I'm going to put it in crap because the NLT is meh. And the Living Bible is just the old version of the NLT. And so it's like, if you're going to at least use like this sort of more dynamic Bible, at least use that, in my opinion. Okay, Young's. Okay, I'm going to give it a B. Young's literal translation of the Bible is the most literal translation to a fault, in my opinion, because you may as well just be reading the interlinear. So every time I've seen it, it just like gets the sentences backwards and everything like that. May as well just use an interlinear, which is the, you know, with the Greek side by side English words. Basic. So if you're wanting the most literal translation, use a Greek interlinear. So I'm going to put that in meh. I would almost put it in crap because it feels so bad saying this, but it almost feels like a useless translation, to be honest. Sorry, I'm going to put it in crap. Yeah. Okay. Speaking of crap, Douay Rheims. Yeah, we're going to put that in crap. It's a Catholic translation. I think this is from the Vulgate, if I'm not mistaken. So the Vulgate is in itself not a good translation. You know, the Latin Vulgate has had so many errors, even in, for example, the way it translates, you know, repentance. It thinks it means penance, and the Catholics use that, of course, to advocate for penance as a sacrament. It's a crap translation. I would put it in burn it, but I'll leave it in crap for now. Co-Fraternity version is an old Catholic translation. It's just not that useful in my opinion. The New American Bible and the Revised Edition and the New American Bible can also go in crap. They're the American Catholic Bibles. I would almost say burn it because it's Catholic, but you know, sometimes it's interesting to at least see what they say, but they're not great, to be honest. Knox Bible is another Catholic one. It sounds like it would be a translation rather from John Knox. I thought when I heard the term Knox Bible, whenever I first heard it, I was like, oh, is this John Knox's translation of the Bible? Well, no, it's not. It's some other guy with the last name Knox, and he's a Catholic. I just think it's a bad Catholic Bible in my opinion. so you can go there. Same with the Jerusalem and the New Jerusalem Bible. They're Catholic Bibles done by Benedictine monks or thereabouts, I think. And so you just get some really odd things in those ones. Not worth keeping. We can be picky. Put it in the burn it pile. Why not? And obviously the New Jerusalem Bible is just a more up-to-date modern version. I don't actually know the difference between these two, strictly speaking. I'm not very, very familiar with them, but enough to at least say the history of it is sketchy. Put it in D. All right, NIV. This is the one I couldn't wait to get to because the NIV, I'm going to put it in C because I don't think it's like heresy burn it. Like, I don't think we should be doing that with the NIV. There are much other worse Bibles that are doing this. But I do think the NIV has plummeted and tanked so bad since the 2011 update. And with the amount of other decent translations out there, like a lot of these versions in Meh, for example, at least don't make the same mistakes the NIV does. So the NIV in 2011 took the NIRV, which is, the TNN, which was meant to be a more friendly, sort of open, accessible version of the NIV. And in that version was more gender-inclusive language, so they removed a lot of the he, she pronouns in certain words because the words in Greek and Hebrew are often gendered and kind of rendered them as more gender-neutral. The problem is with that is you lose so much richness of God's design for gender, really, to put it bluntly. And so since then, I honestly just think the NIV is not a worthwhile translation. It's still the best-selling translation in the world, but it's like, there are just so many other ones you would rather read, to be honest. Now, sure, maybe you want to reference it occasionally. Before it had those updates, the NIV was a good dynamic translation. It was probably one of the better dynamic translations out there. And so maybe if you've got like a 1984 NIV, you could probably, reference it. I might even put it in worth reading, to be honest, if it was the 1984 NIV, because it's a good reference. But since they made these awful changes to it, I don't understand. Some of the guys who are on the committee, I'm like, you know better. So anyway, I can't recommend the end. I wouldn't say burn it, but it's definitely not recommended. Yeah, New Catholic Bible, not worth reading, to be honest. Not worth it. We just don't need it. Same with the Passion, for a very different reason. It's probably worse than the Message. If I could put the Passion in its own category, I'd probably put it in the burn it again category, because it is just a guy's thought process. Really, it's a book. It's fiction, almost, I would say, the Passion. It's popular with female preachers. Preachers, really. Do you need much more proof than that, to be honest? You don't. New translation by Joseph Smith. Burn it. Heresy. Mormon Bible. New World Translation. JW's. Burn it. It renders John 1 wrong by saying Jesus was a God. Burn it. Orthodox Study Bible. I'm not very familiar with the Orthodox Study Bible. My intention would be to put it in the lower tiers because Eastern Orthodoxy is not a sound faith tradition, in my opinion, in the same way Roman Catholicism is not. But I probably don't know enough about it, if there's any helpful stuff in there, how strong on the Orthodox doctrines they are. Yeah. We'll put it in there. Okay, Septuagints. We've got 3 Septuagint English translations. Now, I am not a Greek guy at this stage. I'm going to be studying soon, but I've never read any of these really. So I can't give crazy amounts of weight to any of them. I could just put them all in not familiar, but I do know things about these 3 translations, which is that Brenton's is a little older and it's a little more, it's fairly literal. The NETS as well here, the New English Septuagint, is a little more like literal, whereas the Lexham is trying to be a little readable. I'm going to leave these 3 in here because I feel like it's not really fair to put these amongst the other ones. Septuagint's kind of a different ball game in my opinion, because it's already the Septuagint's already a translation of the Bible. People would obviously be funny on whether it is scripture or not because of which is not the original language, which is Hebrew. So I'm not gonna put this in amongst everything else. Okay, Geneva Bible, worth reading. is the Bible of the Reformers, of the Puritans. You know, then there was this transition in those times to the King James Version. It's a really good Bible to read. It's interesting. The English is not that readable, but there are modernized versions you can buy of the Geneva Bible, which is cool. I think it's worth reading because it's the theology of the Reformers, where the Bible they used, worth checking out in my opinion. Nice as well, like it's got some similarities to the King James, but some differences there as well. I would love to read more of the Geneva, to be honest. Okay, NASB. We're going to put this in definitive versions. In the process of being superseded by the LSB, but I would say the NASB still has quite a strong stance as a definitive translation. It is a good, solid, literal translation, probably one of the more literal ones. Great for study. People prefer the 1995 version for some reason. Some people like the more modern version. I don't really know enough to comment on both of those. I just like the NASB as a study tool. I look at it mostly online when I'm referring to it. I don't tend to read it in person, but it's a great tool to reference. So I would say that's a good definitive version. You could preach from it. For some people, it might be a little too literal for preaching, but I think it's a good one. NLT, I'm gonna pop in meh. It's probably, it's trying to be a dynamic translation, right? It's not a literal translation. It's trying to be readable, but... And I do think of the dynamic, readable translation, it's up there. But again, I'm just not a fan of the philosophy. I think NLT is okay to reference occasionally. I don't think it's something you want to make a habit of reading every day. I know some people will disagree with me on that. Some people do read from the NLT. I've got friends who read from the NLT every day, and that's good for them. I just think there are better translations to read from. That being said, if I had to pick a dynamic translation, I mean, the CSB is still literal. I think they are more on the literal side, but it's in a sense sort of dynamic, at least more so than others. But the NLT is very dynamic by comparison, but I think it's probably one of the more reliable dynamics. So maybe it can go in meh or B. It gets a B+. Okay, HCSB, in my opinion, again, it probably can go in meh. It's just a less good version of the CSB, in my opinion. Yeah, nothing much more to say about that. We're keeping it curated here. Okay, ESV, we're going to put straight up in definitive version. This is the version I read from, I study from most of the time. I've preached my first sermon from. It's the version a lot of people use for preaching in their churches. The ESV is great. It's a good balance of it's not dynamic, it's literal, but it's readable. And I think it's readable for the majority of people. I know a lot of people say, oh, but the NIV is more readable. Well, just like if you compare the NIV and the ESV, I don't think they're that different in terms of readability level. That could sound like a very, educated English thing to say, but they don't seem that different to me. In fact, sometimes I feel like in some ways the NIV is more difficult to read than the ESV, which has been a weird thing I've noticed in certain passages at least. Anyway. Okay, NRSV and the RSV. The RSV definitely, you know what, these both get a crap. The RSV, when it came out, was meant to sort of replace the King James Version. It had so many errors in the Old Testament. The NRSV is just that again. It tends to be used in scholarly circles and in liberal circles, which often are basically the same thing. So it's just the more, in fact, it's become more liberalized in my opinion. So I think this one can both get a crap. NRSV, I might even put more towards D, but it can be helpful for some like academic reasons. You might want to use this one, but for the average Christian, no. Okay. Orthodox, that's not it. We've got to go CEB, Common English Bible. Again, probably meh. I think this one's trying to be another one of those accessible, easy to read ones, but it's still a dynamic translation. It's not a transliteration or anything. I think we could just put it in meh. I haven't read it tons, but yeah. New King James Version, we are putting that in definitive version. Now, I am slowly falling in love with the NKJV more and more every day, to a point where I can actually see myself switching from the ESV to the NKJV in the long term as like sort of my daily driver Bible, even preaching Bible. The ESV is better in some ways, in my opinion, but the New King James Version is better in other ways. And I think what the New King James Version does, for me, it's just more enjoyable to read than the ESV. The ESV is great. It's good for study. It's good for reading still. I'm not saying it's bad to read the ESV, but I just enjoy the NKJV much more. The language is a little more beautiful, in my opinion. I feel like it translates and uses some older words while still being readable that capture the definition more of what that word in the Greek or Hebrew meant. However, I still prefer the ESV on some translation issues. An example of when I would prefer the NKJV would be in Galatians 1 verse 6. It'd say, "I marvel that you are so quickly deserting," whereas the ESV would say, "I am astonished." Now, the word marvel, I just feel like captures the richness of what that word means more than the ESV. But then another place I prefer the ESV would be in Hebrews 4. It translates the word sabbatismos, which means rest, which I think is more accurate than what the NKJV does, which is it translates it just as rest. So I think there are benefits to the ESV still, but I just am liking the NKJV more and more every day. It's not perfect, but it is definitely definitive. And on that note, King James Version. Okay, we're going to put this in worth reading. I think... Oh, that's not it. Here we go. Worth reading. I think it's good. It's obviously a very controversial translation. Some people love it. Some people hate it. Some people think it's the only valid translation. It's definitely not the only valid translation. It definitely has a lot of problems, and modern scholarship kind of makes light of that. But then again, there are problems with modern scholarship as well. So I'm not saying all the critics of the KJV are necessarily always right either. So I put it in worth reading. I think it's beautiful. It's poetic. The Old English, in some ways, is actually closer to the Greek and Hebrew. The English language has become worse over time, and that's why you don't get... Some of the words we have just don't capture the reality of what the NKJV can capture, because we just don't use those words anymore. So that is one benefit the King James Version actually has. That's why Joel Beakey uses it, as far as I am aware. He likes the older English words. So it's not a translation philosophy issue, it's just the change in language. And it's also great because a lot of the older resources you may use for study refer to the King James Version. So it can be really helpful for study. I think it's not worth throwing out the King James Version like some people are so eager to do. And we're going to put the LSB last in the definitive versions here. LSB is slowly replacing the NASB. I think James White called it the NASB Perfected, or someone called it the NASB Perfected. It obviously translates things like the word Lord as Yahweh in the Old Testament. Not the first translation to do that, but that coupled with the very strong literal translation, fixing up some of the issues in the NASB. I think it's worth calling it a definitive version, and I think we will see it overtake the NASB in years to come. But right now, the NASB is still popular, it's still widespread, it's still used a lot. And for that reason, I think we can call them both definitive translations. Some people don't like the LSB for various reasons. They think the amount of people involved with the creation of it was too small, so it's very biased. I haven't really seen that, to be honest, but I think it's great for study. It's very literal, more literal than the NKJV and ESV still, because that's what the NASB is. And I think it's a great tool, so I'm going to put it in definitive version. And that is my tier of Bible translations. You may agree strongly, you may disagree strongly with many of the placements of these. We can have a chat in the comments. If you have any opinions on any of the ones I'm not familiar with, also leave something in the comments, then let's chat about that. And anything else, just drop a comment. And before you go, remember to grab my free list of over 400 Christian books in different subcategories. If you just want one place to reference good books, know where to buy them from, know how many pages are in each book, know when it was published, grab that for free below, and I'll just send it to you via email. And anyway, hope you enjoyed this type of content. If you want more, let me know. Otherwise, God bless, and I'll see you next time.